there's doers who tend to tell somebody else to do something and then get pissed off when they do it right and then go do it instead of working through the process, especially if it's the first time doing something. And then there's managers in the mentality who try to help someone do it correctly and work with them if there are any issues so that the second time they do it better. I see that a lot in construction and project-based businesses.
Welcome to the FlyWheel Effect, the podcast where ambition meets expertise in the world of luxury home services. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a small business owner, or a forward-thinking professional, this is your platform for growth, profit, and prosperity. Each episode, we dive deep into how to leverage data for smarter business decisions and share insights that help you transition from technician to visionary. Let's jump in.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the FlyWheel Effect. This is Brent Sonnek-Schmelz, along with my co-hosting partner, Matt Bernath. Matt, how are you doing today?
Man, feeling great. I'm very excited about this topic and looking forward to another amazing conversation with you.
Yeah, I'm loving delegation. One little more, I like to share little stories about my children sometimes coming up because, I'm a new dad relatively, but an old dad, ancient in dad terms. My son caught his first fish this week. And I have never seen, we were out visiting my in-laws in Wisconsin and he's fishing off the dock, catching like a bluegill. Like literally he caught it on his own. He's not quite 3. And the yelps of unadulterated joy that came out of him was just that like perfect sound you want to hear from your child when they do something. So like, I'll never forget that little yelp that he had. And it was just awesome. So now I got to get my boat in the water. I haven't done this year, but I wanted to, and take him out fishing like twice a week at 6 o'clock in the morning. Having a fishing buddy is one of the things I'm really looking forward to with my kid.
That's
so
cool. Anyway,
I just wanted to share that because that was a little exciting. There's no delegation with that for me. That's just me being dad. Actually, that's not true. There was delegation in this. I was working and the first fish he caught was delegated to my niece who took him fishing. He took him fishing. The yelp that I got was like on the third fish that he caught where I finally showed up. So technically I delegated his first fish to somebody else. So let's just get into that. Why delegation is magic here. Matt, I know you're a huge fan of delegation. You believe it to the core, but it's really hard for you, isn't it?
Yep.
Why is it hard for you?
I think there's a couple of reasons. My personality type is very much one where it's hard to relinquish control. And that is because I'm very detailed and very much believe that, I can do it the best, right? Which I think that a lot of business owners can identify with. It has been a long road for me and a work in progress, for me to get to a point where delegation is, just a part of my ethos. And the way that I've done that is by being very critical about who I hire to make sure that there's trust there. And then recognizing when there isn't trust and helping to bridge that gap. And being the leader, I'm the one who has to start that process of trust building when I feel like I can't trust to delegate. So I think those are a few things that come up for me when you ask that question.
I think that's great. I think delegation, my personal life, delegation is not as hard for me. I actually may get more frustrated on the backside sometimes than you do. But handing something over, I'm actually very curious to see how someone performs, right? But I think what this gets back to is how important delegation is, regardless of what type of person you are. And this is why I wanted to cover the topic. Literally, it's impossible for a business to grow without delegation. And you say, how is that possible? I can do everything. No, you can't. Nobody can do everything. Solopreneurs is one term, or just sole business owners. They can do everything, but they can only do one thing at a time. They can't do two, right? And there has to come a point in time of everybody that has to delegate. And what are 2 problems with delegation? 1, you're not doing it, so you don't no longer have control. 2, you probably have to pay somebody to do it. So all of a sudden you feel like you're reducing your income by paying somebody to do something. And both of those things hurt. How do you suggest somebody actually gets over that hump and over that hurdle?
Yeah, there's there's a bunch that comes up for me. It's funny as I'm listening to you talk, but so much happening here. I think before I get into that, I would like to define delegation versus abdication, because
Oh, that's great. That's
I
great.
think they get collapsed. And in fact, there's I've experienced this myself, and I've also come across many business owners that I've worked with who believe that they're delegating when in fact they're abdicating. And I would say, I'll challenge you to say that that's probably why your frustration happens on the back end of delegation.
It very well could be.
Chances are you might end up being abdicating, which, as defined by what you just said of saying, oh, I like to test somebody and see how they do, that's technically abdication. Like, hey, I'm going to throw this in your lap. Let's talk about what you, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there are two different ways to go about that route, but delegation, the often the missing component, or at least for me, where I moved from abdication to delegation, which by the way is still a work in progress.
Matt, before you get there, let's actually define them. Like you said, let's define them. Let's give a definition to delegation and a definition to abdication.
Well, I'm about to do that. I think the difference between, and again, I'm not the guy who's going to quote Webster's Dictionary. You could certainly look that up while I'm talking, which I think would be interesting, actually.
Yeah, let's do it.
But the way that I see the big difference is abdication is telling somebody this is what needs to get done, and then walking away without giving them direction on what good looked like, right? Delegation, for me, actually is when the leader or whoever is doing the delegating describes what good looks like and says, hey, these are the outcomes that I need. These are the success factors, the KPIs, and then also getting buy-in, right? So the buy-in piece and the definition of outcomes, I think, differentiate delegation from abdication. Abdication looks like this. Hey, here's this thing that needs to get done. See you later, right? Versus delegation saying, hey, here's the thing that needs to get done. I'd like to get your buy-in on you being the person who does it. And then, by the way, this is how you know you've succeeded because it looks and feels and smells like this. I believe that's the difference. Were you able to find the definition?
I did, and they're a little funny, right? So abdication is very interesting. An act of abdicating or renouncing the throne. Abdication is literally tied to the monarchy. Second one, failure to fulfill a responsibility or duty, which means it basically falls in somebody else's lap. Another way to say it is to give up a position with no possibility of resuming it. So it's literally giving something over to someone else, take care of it, wipe your hand, move on. And if you're managing or leading, you're not giving them any guidance. You're not taking any ownership of it. You're not being supportive and leading. You're just saying, hey, take care of this. I don't want to be bothered, which inevitably leads to problems. Delegation means something else. It means to give a particular job or duty to someone else so that they do it for you, right? To delegate is entrusting, and trust, which I think you brought up, is a really critical part. So a responsibility to another person and giving them the authority to do it as your representative. So abdicating is wiping your hands, handing something off, take care of it, which diminishes its value. Delegation says, this is important. I'm entrusting with you to get it done. Please do so. Two very, very different perspectives on handing something to somebody else.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting. I found really like a 4-step process for delegation that has worked for me. The first thing that I do is I lay the groundwork. So I'll meet with whoever I intend to delegate this to and say, hey, here's the task or project or function that I need help with, or the business needs help with, and illustrate the finer points of what's involved and why the work is important and what the overall impact is. So it's a little bit of a 10,000-foot view of, hey, here's this work we need to get done, and here's why it's valuable. And then I find that asking for help creates buy-in. To say, hey, look, here's why I think you're the right person for this role or for this job or for this project. I'd like your help with this, or I need your help with this. And I think at that time, that's step number 2 for me. You can judge whether or not you've chosen the right person, right? If they push back and say, oh, I'm not really that guy or that person, it's time to dig in. But ultimately, I believe that delegation is most successful when the person you're delegating to has buy-in and they actually believe that they can do a great job. The next piece, the third step for me, is to train and develop. And I think this is the piece that's different for delegation versus abdication, is create a little bit of a training plan with a person. Again, this could be very simple because it might be task-based. It could be project-based, but ultimately allowing them, whoever you delegate to create those training goals and processes and identify their blind spot. And throughout that, also defining what good looks like. What does success look like for you? How is this going to be measured? What is the timeline? And that's a piece often that I forget. I often forget urgency. And I think what I've learned from that over time is that because I'm the boss or a boss, people feel like anything the boss delegates becomes ultimately very urgent. And I've experienced that without stating the level of priority right out of the gate, they tend to put it at the top of the list, which can be problematic, right? Then the fourth step is just check-ins and feedback. Hey, I've delegated this to you. We're going to meet weekly on it. We're going to meet hourly on it, depending on how big the project is. Hey, we're going to meet on this rhythm. And here's what I'd like to know every time we meet. Come up with a little bit of an agenda for that meeting. And then throughout that process, you're iterating and giving them feedback along the way. So that's kind of my 4-step, delegation process.
And basically what you defined is, right? Like in your world, what's the difference? Is there any difference between delegation and management?
Very, very similar.
Very similar. I think that it's really interesting. So and I think that's where small business owners, I think I'd like to tie this back to, luxury home service providers or custom integrator. There's doers who tend to tell somebody else to do something and then get pissed off when they do it right and then go do it instead of working through the process, especially if it's the first time doing something. And then there's managers in the mentality who try to help someone do it correctly and work with them if there are any issues so that the second time they do it better. I see that a lot in construction and project-based businesses. Hey, that business owner is really successful, but they're either one of two things, right? They're a salesperson first, or they're a technician of some sort. And if they're a technician, they're going to be on the job. They're going to yell at somebody for drilling a hole wrong somewhere, and then or whatever else is going on. And then there's fuck it, I'll just do it myself. And literally, they always say those are the exact words out of their mouth every single time, right? And then they go do it, and then the person never does that again, or maybe tries it a second time, but is afraid to ever make that mistake. And what does that lead? In my perspective, is that you can only do one project at a time. Like you just limited your company's growth by whatever multiple of jobs that it can be if you can manage project manager on the job site.
So let me ask you, how come you're able to describe this experience with such great detail, Brent?
Oh, how am I?
How are you able to describe this experience with such great detail?
I have a business partner who is an absolute wonderful technician in real estate. And he knows everything about every contractor sub you can ever imagine. But when that sub fucks up, man, it's just lightning in a bottle. And look, I've seen him do it. It's like, and the thing is, because he's so good at each one of these things. And he has no patience for someone who doesn't have his same level of expertise, because it's got to be done the right way. And I say, man, I just tell him all the time, just figure out how to manage and teach people, and we'll be doing 6 projects at once, right? That's just what. But that's a really, really hard lesson to learn for small business people. Like, almost impossible sometimes. But the ones that do are the ones that really grow.
Well, it's funny. I've unpacked this a little bit with some of our members and other people in the industry. And they have this belief, which, by the way, beliefs drive everything that we do or don't do. They have this belief that if they don't execute at that high of a level, that their business won't grow. It's the opposite, right? They're not growing because they're expecting everybody to execute on the same level they do. And then nobody does. And therefore that person is a terrible employee or hire or subcontractor or whatever the case may be. And they move on. And that's a really hard lesson. It's a hard belief. I mean, shifting beliefs, by the way, is the hardest thing. You and I know that. It's the hardest thing to do, period. Changing somebody's belief. And it's a big part of what we do at Vital, and it takes a long time and a ton of effort. But if a small contractor or small business owner can change their belief from everything has to be perfect 100% of the time to we're going to do our very best to hold the highest standards and teach and train and hold everybody to that high standard, we can actually grow, right? But perfection is in the way of progress in so many cases with these small.
And it's actually a little more than that. It's my way is perfect.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you get a perfect outcome a variety of different ways, but a lot of these guys, my way is perfect. And if you're doing it any way else, it's not right. And the way I like to think about it, I'm a relatively high performer in a lot of things. I try to tell myself when I'm delegating or asking someone to do something, I look for 80% of what I think I can do myself. And if they exceed that and approach 100% or maybe get even better, make it 110, which happen, often, I'm really excited. And then I'll give them more and keep working. But having that kind of 80% threshold allows things to be good enough and move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's two things that I've learned from a mentor of mine recently. One is 80% done by somebody else is 100% amazing, right? So that's true. The other piece is the first question you have to ask yourself when you're disappointed by somebody's outcomes or somebody's output is, did you teach them exactly how you wanted it done? And I think this popped into my head when you were describing your business partner is chances are he didn't tell them what good looks like, or he didn't set the expectation. And sure, you can be frustrated with the outcome, but the fact is, if you ask yourself the question, hey, did you teach them specifically how you want it done and then hold that standard? If the answer is no, then that turns into a training moment and, you just have to swallow the pill and move on.
And this is a problem for doers. When you're a doer, you do not want to waste the time in teaching or training or setting expectations, because that's a waste of time because you're not actually doing anything. And it's crazy. I mean, I think, you had me read the book, and I think you do this a lot, is the Dan Martell book, right? Buy Back Your Time. What's the purpose of that book is if you can identify the things that you can delegate and delegate them well and properly, your growth become dramatic. Because imagine you do everything 100%. And actually there's quadrants, like things that get you juiced up that are really important, you got to get done. There's other stuff that's maybe not as important to get you juiced up. You should delegate those. And things that don't get you juiced up but are important, like there's all these different angles, should delegate everything else. Only things you should do are the things that get you fired up and excited and you do well and are important. Everything else that you delegate, you've now given yourself a multiplier. A person is a multiplier when they delegate. Your value goes from 100 to 1,000 incredibly quickly when you learn the magic of delegation here, right? Like, I mean, I'm sure you have more Martell tidbits here, but that's the essence of what his lessons are.
Yeah. Well, I think the big takeaway there is, what do you do with that time that you freed up? And, are you going to spend that time screwing around, which is an option? Are you going to spend that time building your business in a different way? Are you going to double down on those things that get you juiced up and are important? Or you could also spend that time on personal development, which I think is very valuable. And the trap that doers fall into, and I know this because, I was a doer for a long time, the trap that doers fall into is when we're not doing, we're not feeling fulfilled. And so spending the time on self-development doesn't really feel that important. And I think that's where a lot of doers get stuck in this trap of not being able to grow, is they haven't created time and space to grow, and they haven't been able to change their belief system that growth is actually at least as important, if not more important, than the doing. And again, we're back to that belief system. I mean, truly, we can only change when we change our belief system. And I'm here to say to all the doers out there, having been a reformed doer, that there is at least as much satisfaction, if not more, in self-growth and personal growth and taking your leadership to the next level. Guess what? You can all of a sudden really have a ton of satisfaction in watching other people succeed and grow. And that's a pretty incredible space.
That's great. Like I think I'm sure that that's going to be one of those little quote bits that's going to be popping up for everybody on LinkedIn. But it's so true, right? Like all of a sudden you can breathe. And by the way, you're not gonna if you're a doer, you're not gonna do less. You're actually gonna do more, and you're gonna get more fulfilled if you can carve out that 10 to 15% of your time to delegate and manage. Like it's leverage. Leverage drive everything. I'm a doer too. Like I'm always gonna book my own plane tickets. I don't know why. I'm just going to, even though it's low value stuff. I can't help it. But for those that can offload everything like that, like I'm on some groups that like they have chefs in their house. They say it's not that expensive, and you don't have to spend any time cooking, and your dinner's ready. You don't have to think. And all of a sudden, I just my wife and I opened up 10 hours of time. Like I'm not doing that myself, but I've had friends who said that. It's different levels of delegation, but if you start doing one thing, like your books, maybe find a bookkeeper. That's a good first step. If you're a single entrepreneur, that's a delegation. And that will make you not spend 3 hours at night after you got home from work on a project, tired, trying to get your books right, which you never do because you're too tired to do them. Another good example, I think, of peer groups is peer groups, whether they're ours or Vistage or whatever. The people who say they're never going to join one because it's a waste of time are these doers that just want to do stuff as opposed to figuring out how to make themselves better. Such great development to talk to other entrepreneurs in a safe, confidential space.
Yeah, totally agree. One other message for all the doers out there, again, as a reformed doer, is I think there's this belief that the harder you work, the more money you're going to make, right? And so,
Right.
there's this drive to say, well, I can just work harder or sell more, or there's this brute force mentality to making money. And the reality is, if you just unpack all the money makers out there, 8 out of 10 or more will tell you that the amount of money you make is equivalent to the value you put in the marketplace. And if you're a doer, to your point early on when we first started this thing, doers can only put so much value into the marketplace because they're just that, it's just them or maybe them and somebody else, right? There's only so much market, only so much value. But when you learn how to delegate and lead and manage, you can put so much more value out into the marketplace. You can impact so many more people. And, not only does your satisfaction increase, as has been my experience, but also, your earning potential goes through the roof. And that's true. You look at any successful business across any industry, it's true for those businesses. The ones that are putting out the most value are the ones that are making the most money.
For sure. This is great. I think we're running up against when we want to finish. Any last thoughts, Matt? Even though that was a great last thought here before we close it out.
No, I think this is fantastic. Do you have any points, Brent, that you keep in mind when you're delegating? What are your success factors in delegating?
I think one of them, as you said, I have a tendency to just want to hand something off and move on with my time. But I have to, and I'm doing that with someone now who I'm mentoring, where I've delegated some project, is I have to maintain. A key to delegation for me is maintaining enough engagement such that I train and monitor so that the end result is what it needs to be. Whether it's 100% of what I can do or not. But unless I have engagement, unless you have engagement, anybody, and this is where direct reports come in, right? Like you delegate to direct report. You can only have so many direct reports because it takes time to manage and delegate properly. Staying on top of that is what determines whether success or failure comes out of that delegation and management. Gets back to the solo guy who just says do something and yells at the end. The reason it's not working is because they're not staying engaged. They give a task, abdicate it, then come back and get annoyed when it's not right. That's a recipe for failure every time. I mean, it can work sometimes, but it doesn't scale. It doesn't grow. So that's my final thought, is that delegation is different. Is you're still engaged, you're still responsible for it. You just make sure it gets done by somebody else and you leverage it.
Absolutely. Love it.
All right, cool. Thank you again, Matt. This has been another wonderful conversation on the FlyWheel Effect. And for those of you out there listening, we only ask a couple of things. If you'd enjoyed this podcast, please give us a like, a follow, and a review. And if you know someone who think this would be valuable for them, please share the podcast link and then listen in again. And if anybody wants to have a deeper conversation about delegation and how you can make that transition from that doer mentality to that delegating management mentality, give us a ring. We're always happy to talk and love to see how we can help. So anyway, this is Brent Sonnek-Schmelz, and we're along with Matt Bernath. And thank you again for listening to the FlyWheel Effect.
Thank you, Brent. Always love our conversations.
Every time.
Thank you for tuning in to the FlyWheel Effect. Our journey through the intricate world of luxury home services continues to be fueled by your passion for excellence and innovation. If you found value in our conversations today, don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts. More insights and resources. Visit us online at growwithvital.com. Until next time.